What does rock bottom look like to you? If you're watching this from an urban environment, then you don't really know the extent to which humans are willing to stoop to just to survive. When you're stranded on a frozen tundra with nothing but other humans as your only supply of nutrition, would you choose starvation or survival? That's a question many fictional franchises have answered in various ways, but Invincible's adaptation of it has to be one of the darkest. And a lot of that is up to the way it's incorporated into the story through another version of its main character. In this video, we'll take a look at the origins of Sinister Mark, who's been introduced as one of the worst evil Invincibles in the multiverse. So, spoiler alert for those who haven't read the comics, and without further ado, we're ready to get right into it. But before we get too ahead of ourselves, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. It's a small click for you, but for us, it means everything. Thank you. Let's begin. He comes from a dimension more evil than others. Sinister Mark's origins. A lot of Mark Graysons from the multiverse are downright psychotic. Many of them have killed their comrades, killed Eve, even killed Omni-Man. One of the evil Marks killed his dad and then took his place as Omni-Invincible, while another wants to kill him for imprisoning him in a Viltrumite jail. Unlike Prime Mark, who would kill anyone that tries to harm his family, evil Marks haven't hesitated from killing their family themselves, and none have done so with quite as much ruthlessness as Sinister Mark. He comes from a bizarre dimension where everything is evil and unhinged on a baseline level, which is reflected in the fact that he thinks he's a hero. We'll get to more on that in a bit, but let's talk about one of the key details that we have about his origin story. Unlike other versions of Invincible, most of whom sport variants of either the classic yellow, blue, and black suit or the darker blue and black suit, Sinister Mark's costume is black and yellow with an elaborate cape draped over the shoulders. Capes are usually only worn by characters with grandiose opinions of themselves, so it isn't much of a stretch to think that Sinister Mark loved being emperor of his reality. But what makes him so disturbing is the fact that he also killed the Debbie of the world, something our Mark can't even imagine doing. Apparently, killing Debbie isn't uncommon among evil Invincibles, and it makes sense because Debbie represents their filthy humanity. Most evil Marks are evil because they buy into the Viltrumite philosophy of racial superiority, even if they don't become a part of the Empire. They think themselves above everyone else, and that's the case with Sinister Mark as well. He killed Debbie in his own childhood home, which tells you how far he went in severing his bonds to humanity. What also gives away his overtly evil nature is the fact that when he sees Oliver, he has no idea who he is. That's because Oliver Grayson doesn't exist in any reality apart from the main one. Let that sink in for a minute. There's no other universe where Nolan has a change of heart and becomes the benevolent ruler of Thraxa, eventually siring a child with a Thraxan woman called Andressa. That alone should tell you just how low the numbers are when we talk about good Mark Graysons out there in the multiverse, but even among the evil ones, Sinister Mark stands head and shoulders above his peers. In the Amazon show's version of events, he kills the son of Angstrom Levy from his dimension in front of him, saying that he'll kill the boy quickly because that's how he does things. This one detail will make a lot of his actions make sense down the road, especially because during the Invincible War, he's the first one out of the gate. He leads the charge during the Invincible War in all things. When Angstrom Levy begins his plan to publicly humiliate his enemy, Sinister Mark leads the charge. He immediately flies off to the East Coast and engages the Duncan Rosenblatt of this dimension, seeing as he is the king of monsters where he comes from. Firebreather is one of Image Comics' more interesting creations. He's a half-human, half-dragon son of the demon Belloc and has the ability to transform into several monstrous forms to do battle with various kinds of enemies. The original Duncan is a kind, sweet boy who's been bullied a lot in his life and learns how to fight back the hard way, but the one from Sinister Mark's dimension is a goddamn handful. He fully embraces his demonic heritage and leans into it, invoking the powers of his many given names and becoming the most dangerous being in his timeline. You can tell Sinister Mark is delusional because he calls Duncan a villain, when in fact, he was most likely being antagonistic towards the kid. And even though Firebreather's power is immense, Sinister Mark pretty much brushed him aside like a friggin' gnat. After dealing with him, he comes across Oliver, and he's disgusted with the half-breed that's attempting to resist him. His dimension prioritizes purity above all else, and he genuinely couldn't understand how a lesser being like Oliver planned on beating a near-perfect Viltrumite like himself. It's unknown how Ollie survives that fight, because the next time we see Sinister, he's flying over a ruined city on day 3 of the Invincible War. He's hella annoyed that Angstrom called him to his childhood home as a rendezvous point, and his patience boils over when the guy has the nerve to ask even more of them. After quote-unquote making an entrance, Angstrom tells his Invincibles that they need to bring him Prime Mark Grayson, and Sinister Mark snaps. According to him, the entire operation was in shambles because they'd been whittled down to just 8 by a bunch of heroes they'd been led to believe were inferior to the ones they knew. Besides, it was 8 against 1 now, and Angstrom had done nothing to hold up his end of the bargain. Sinister instigated a rebellion, but before it got to the point of violence, Angstrom sent him and every other surviving evil mark to the Wasteland dimension. All he had to do was leave them there for as long as he wanted and he'd be fine because there was no way out for them. And even if there was, they didn't have anyone who cared enough about them to go looking. Sinister Mark curses out Levy and promises that they would find a way out of this, but they never do. Instead, what happens is far too dark for us to get into in much detail, so we're going to try our best to keep it as PG as possible. Sinister Mark forces cannibalism onto the survivors. Time works differently across different dimensions. A day can feel like a year if you're in a place where temporal displacement is quite common, and vice versa, to be honest. Angstrom Levy's Wasteland dimension was completely devoid of any natural resources beyond sand, and after trying to hold out for as long as they could, the evil marks he stranded there eventually got hungry. Apparently, one of them was a grade A butthole and no one liked him, so Sinister Mark worked on convincing everyone else to join him in killing that guy and then eating his flesh to survive. At first, the others agreed because they knew they needed to do something to stay alive, and survival instinct can get ugly to say the least. The 7 of them hated that one evil Mark Grayson and made do with his corpse for as long as they could, but once his flesh ran out, it would be time to kill another, and no person in their right mind would volunteer themselves as a meal, especially when they're as strong as Invincible. Sinister Mark knew that if he wanted access to fresh meat without needing to fight, he'd need to keep the others in line, so he used cannibalism as a control device. Eventually, it came down to 3 of them: Mohawk Mark, Cannibal Mark, and a Mark Grayson who ended up joining the Viltrumite Empire. Mohawk Mark was camping out in the desert for a long time when Prime Mark Grayson was sent to the Wasteland by Angstrom once again in issue 103. We saw Cannibal Mark eating Viltrumite Mark and calling his body a fresh kill, so we can only assume that this is how things played out. Initially, everyone was in agreement that they would draw lots or something to decide who became dinner, but Cannibal knew he'd need to shore up his resources, so he manipulated some of the marks into teaming up with him with false promises of finding a way to get them out of there. Mohawk Mark eventually realized how evil this guy truly was and broke away from him, but Viltrumite Mark decided to stay. He paid for it with his life when Cannibal Mark betrayed him, killed him, and ate him on the spot, and you could tell how far gone he was because he didn't even know if Prime Mark was real or not upon his arrival. He invited him for a meal and started questioning his identity, seeing as he mostly recalled everyone who was left here with him except for a guy wearing the standard Invincible costume. He eventually stopped caring about the details because Viltrumite Mark was a skinny little thing by the time he killed him. Prime Mark was literal fresh meat, and eating him would keep Cannibal Mark alive for longer. Once he realized Prime wasn't friendly, he attacked him, and he proved to be surprisingly strong for a guy in his condition. Cannibal Mark rejected Prime Mark's attempts at helping him by saying the only help he needed was sinking his teeth into his face, and if that isn't disturbing to you, we don't know what could be. Luckily for Prime Mark, Mohawk Mark noticed the commotion and decided to help him out. He punched Sinister Cannibal Mark off of his counterpart and told him to make a break for it, all the while rambling about how he didn't mean to eat all those people and how evil the Cannibal Mark truly was. As they were flying to safety, the pair got ambushed by Cannibal, who wanted his fresh kill yesterday. Mark Prime kept him tied up, but Mohawk Mark couldn't take his stupid rantings and he pulverized him to death. He just kept smashing his face in, ignoring good Invincible's call to let him live because he didn't know the horrors that Mohawk had to survive to get this moment. He came from a dimension that was pretty messed up as well, but none of its inhabitants would have gone to the lows that Sinister Mark Grayson did. Mohawk smiled a rather menacing smile when he finally punched the life out of the man who turned him into a cannibal, and for once, we think violence was completely justified. What this guy did was beyond reproach, and we have a feeling that he's getting the extended background treatment by Amazon because of it. We can't wait to see how they expand Cannibal Mark's backstory further because he does sort of become the face of the Invincible War. His origin story is as merciless as his fate, and he's one of the rarer alternate Invincibles who got screen time beyond issue 60. Now that we've put a bow on his character, there's just one thing left to say, and that is marvelous verdict! We want to ask what you thought about Sinister Mark, because that's all we got for this video. Let us know your thoughts on this downright evil version of Mark Grayson in the comment section down below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Invincible content. We'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, stay safe and always pack some hardtack for travel, because you don't want to end up like this guy right here, trust us.